Patrick, are you with us?
I sure am. How's it going?
Hello. It's going good. How are you?
Great. I'd like you guys to enlighten me a little bit. Why is it that states and governments and countries and that are in the situation of defining what marriage is? I mean, isn't or marriage is a religious thing, right? So why can't we hand marriage back to the religious folk and have the religions define what marriage is, which to them is just
because it's totally unacceptable and society won't accept it. It's as simple as that. If we left it up to religion, then there'd be all sorts of outrages, and society would accept it. And the laws that are enforced are a representation, so far as you can, of the objective opinion of society. That is why you need laws in order to control religion.
Before I get any hate mail or anything, let me just clarify. I mean, I've no issues with homosexual marriage or any of that. Like, but why can't we have an entirely separate secular marriage? Except, obviously, don't call it marriage, right? I mean, it's a word game. But if you start using the marriage word, the religious folk will jump on you. So why not have it? I know there's civil unions, right? But I'm actually not. Is that my understanding was that's a subset of the rights you get as a married couple. If it's not, have something else, a partnership or something, which is between, which the government, the country can define. Consenting adults, whatever you want, so it encompasses all different sexualities and stuff. And polygamy, if you.
Sorry, I may have misunderstood your point, and let's see if we can clarify it. Are you suggesting that there should be a institution known as religious marriage and a separate thing that should be known as a sort of like, for want of a better word, a secular civil connection between people? Are you saying
they're basically identical, right?
Is that what you're saying? They're identical,
yeah.
But they're not identical because they're different, because they've got different labels.
No, and they have to. The only reason they have to is because if you call it marriage, the religious people will jump on you.
Well, it's a legal contract, though, DPR. I mean, there's legal implications, especially in our country where we don't have universal health care. It has a value attached to it. And this is where I say, there are people who can make a case. And I'm not representing my own views here, but it is possible to make a case that the society has a vested interest in certain types of pairings, and the types of pairings that represent a family household. And whether that we redefine that means that we'll have an increased number of people covered by healthcare, which also has an associated cost. And then you deal with things like inheritance and custody battles. There's a lot of legal issues involved here, and they're not trivial, and they're not entirely centered on personal relationships. So I agree. I think that there really ought to be the legal aspects of union and the religious personal commitments of union. And I think California has had some success in the civil unions during the brief period where they were allowed to do that. I think it worked okay. There's always potential for abuse. Right now, even civil unions are defined as only being between two people. So that's why you see a lot of rhetoric tying things back to polygamy and bigamy. Because if we advance a slippery slope argument, we say, well, right now we're saying it's two people, man and woman. Okay, we'll let, two people of the same sex. And then, okay, well, maybe we'll let, 100 people marry 100 other people. Of course, that's your typical slippery slope argument that suddenly we've cheapened or defeated the whole purpose of creating this special category.
I mean, if we have that though, I mean, you've got all those battles that you need to fight, like you just said, right? I mean, so maybe they won't want that because it'll have more people in healthcare, right? And we can talk about that. But if you stick with the marriage route, it's one more battle. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That if you take away that label, even though it's identical, you've one less battle to fight against those people, and then you can have the discussions and whatever you need to about does it make sense to have extra civil partnerships.
I'm sorry, Patrick. I stepped away, so I didn't follow exactly what's been said. But just going back to that point, I think it is a battle that has to be had, because otherwise you're basically accepting that. And that is how it will be perceived. You're accepting a lesser position. Why should it be the case that two people of the same sex cannot marry and have the same recognition, you're basically, so far as I understand it, you're saying, well, don't worry about it, we'll just call it something different. But that's not equality then. So you're accepting that there should be some difference.
So let me ask this then. I don't know if there's an answer. Like, is there another religious ceremony that the state or the government has I don't know, defined or had to include in their laws and legislation and all that kind of stuff, or is marriage the only one?
I agree with Patrick.
Yeah.
I don't understand the question, but
in a word, the situation is just tangled. The system grew up this way, with religious and government institutions taking for granted a certain amount of interbreeding between them, and now it's just nearly impossible to undo completely and just say that marriage will be a purely cultural and/or religious phenomenon with no legal recognition. It would be incredibly difficult to go back. So we're left with only the option of granting legitimacy in every sense, cultural and in legal sense, of...
Well, the goal is equality, AA. The whole point is that everyone will have the same access. What Patrick is saying is, rather than advance to the line of marriage, which you're going to get battles from 40–50% of the country, why not advance to an intermediate point where everybody gets civil union? And marriage is something that is a personal decision, has nothing to do with legal contracts or legal recognition.
Yeah, there's two different ways we could go. One is, of course, to... Okay, the problem is if you try to give, for example, homosexuals the right to have marriage just like heterosexual couples, you'll get, as you say, fights from 40 to 50%. But if you try to, in the views of existing heterosexual couples, to downgrade them to civil unions, you're going to get fights from a much larger segment of the population.
Isn't it just a word game, though? Because, like, tell me how it works. At the moment, when you get married in the eyes of the church, fair enough. But then either before or during or after, and I'm not too sure if it's optional, you have to get married in the eyes of the government, right? You need to sign some legal document to say you're married. I don't know if that's a prerequisite for the religious ceremony or vice versa, but is it possible right now to get married in the eyes of the church and then not get a government marriage, right? And if it is if they are actually separate at the moment, why not just have people get a government marriage? You know, the marriage word is what people are going to get hung up on, right? And you know, have the whole ceremony, the religious stuff, and have the religious marriage off to the side. Like, are they not two separate things at the moment?
I think the position is that the service has to be conducted by someone that's allowed to conduct such a service, and it is effectively the putting your signatures on the marriage certificate at the end of the ceremony that
actually the ceremony means nothing in the U.S. It's irrelevant. They have what they call civil marriages here, and basically the two of you go in the presence of a witness and sign a document saying you're married. And of course, there's also common law marriage here in the U.S., which doesn't even require that. Certain states, I think, actually have common law marriage.
I mean,
married is a legal status. Civil unions was something very specific, as I understood it, to California for a brief period of time. I don't know if they still have that policy in place.
Can I make one last point? If it's okay.
Sure, please do.
It's something interesting was said there, like that in America all marriages are really in the eyes of the government. That, you know, a marriage in the eyes of the church is totally, you know, meaningless or whatever. And maybe now everybody realizes that. Like, I mean, maybe what's happened is we've already got what I'm proposing, that kind of government marriage, and it's the religious people have lost their marriage. It doesn't exist anymore. Like, it's the government that has the power of marriage and the definition of marriage. So maybe the religious folk need to go, instead of adding something for civil unions like I started with, we let them add marriage on their side because they've already lost it. We need them to go start from scratch.
Can I open up? It's a slightly different take on this issue, which I know a lot of people use from the other side, the anti-homosexual marriage side, and that is the slippery slope. Can, let's say, two whatever roommates, opposite sex, same sex, they can get married Well, right now they have to be opposite sex, but they're just roommates, they're friends. One of them has a job, the other one's maybe one of those people at Starbucks that are always working on their latest novel. And in that way, they extend the health care that the guy that's working is getting in an effort to sort of double up, so that the affordable insurance is transferred to the roommate. And we can come up with all sorts of other similar types of scenarios, you know, two spinster older women who are sort of living in the same house and decide that, you know, one of them is going to pay for insurance and extend it to the other. Those kinds of things. And then they also can inherit each other. They can share custody of things. There's all sorts of legal ramifications of it, and one of the arguments that's frequently used is it can be abused. Now, I know it can be abused now, but the point is that by relaxing the standards of what it represents, it's no longer necessarily an institution for family, for households, that we remove some value that we find in those kinds of pairings.
Well, the whole thing started to benefit child-rearing couples. That is, you know, a society recognized children are going to need to be raised. They're going to, you know, they need to be born, raised. There's difficulty and expense in doing so. So the whole part of the legal dividend in terms of increased benefits and so forth, whether it be whether they come from the government or from private employers, or whether they be mandated by local laws of the employers and so forth and so on, any of that was to benefit child-rearing couples. So, you know, whether they're your biological children or whether they're adopted, maybe they should simply be revamped more specifically for that intended original purpose, so that situations like the one you described where you have the two roommates simply forming an alliance of convenience and calling it a marriage for legal purposes, that sort of thing would be moot if there was no benefit, if they had no children and had no plans of getting children.
And then there's the policies that are actually hostile to marriage. I'm not very good on this kind of topic, but apparently if you are a married couple, you are less eligible for certain government benefits. And that includes things like child support. So a single mom gets a larger payment for the government from, is it welfare or one of the similar programs? And so that actually has created a situation that is hostile to two-party households.
Yeah, I think we're shifting slightly off topic. So, Patrick, I'm going to thank you very much for your call. I'm going to remove you now and move